The corridor was quiet, almost painfully so, except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Taehyung's hands trembled as he leaned against the wall, eyes fixed on the closed door at the end. Inside, Jungkook moved with a precision that seemed effortless, yet every step carried weight, weight that Taehyung felt pressing against his chest like a storm he couldn't escape. He had seen Jungkook act without hesitation before, but tonight was different. There was a clarity, a decision in Jungkook's eyes that left Taehyung frozen in place. Memories of laughter, shared late-night rehearsals, and countless unspoken moments flickered through his mind. Each memory was a knife, sweet, sharp, and impossible to ignore. "Why now?" Taehyung whispered, barely audible even to himself. The world felt suspended, as if every second stretched into eternity. Outside the rehearsal studio, fans flooded the streets, unaware of the emotional tempest brewing inside. Inside, it wasn't just about music anymore. It was about trust, about moments that couldn't be taken back, and the delicate fractures between two people who had always relied on each other. Jungkook's hand hovered over the console, his fingers tapping rhythmically. Then, without a word, he pressed record. The camera light blinked red, and in that instant, Taehyung felt the weight of thousands of eyes he couldn't see, the invisible crowd that would witness every beat of what was about to unfold. Tears blurred his vision, unbidden, as he remembered the harsh words, the misunderstandings, and the silence that had grown between them like a living thing. He had convinced himself he was strong, that distance and time could protect him. But now, seeing Jungkook act, seeing him choose action over hesitation, Taehyung realized how fragile he had been all along. He stepped forward, almost without thinking, and found himself at the edge of the studio. The hum of equipment, the faint scratch of a mic, and the quiet breath of Jungkook filled the room. It was intimate and terrifying all at once. Then Jungkook turned, meeting his gaze with a calm that belied the storm of emotion in Taehyung's chest. "I can't keep waiting," Jungkook said softly, but the words carried a power that left Taehyung rooted. "I can't act for both of us anymore. It's time you see this too." Taehyung's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to step closer, to tell Jungkook that he understood, that he had always understood. But the moment was already moving past him, inexorable. The screen flickered to life, and what followed was a sequence of images, small moments captured over years. Rehearsals, late-night snack runs, studio laughs, quiet conversations in empty corridors. Each frame was a confession, an unspoken acknowledgement of their bond. And then came the clip that made Taehyung's knees buckle. It was a moment he thought had been private, sealed away in memory. Jungkook, alone in the empty practice room, practicing the very song they had written together months ago, eyes glistening with unshed tears, lost in emotion. The rawness, the vulnerability, struck Taehyung in a way nothing else could. He pressed a hand to his mouth, unable to speak, unable to move. The tears he had held back for weeks spilled freely, sliding down his cheeks like a confession. He cried, not from anger, not from sorrow, but from recognition. Recognition that Jungkook's actions had always been sincere, that his heart had always been honest, and that all the fear Taehyung had nurtured was now laid bare in the most painful, beautiful way. Outside, the streets remained oblivious, the fans' cheers distant, the city unaware of the private reckoning that had just begun. Inside, Taehyung sank to the floor, head in his hands, sobbing in silence. And in that silence he felt something shift, a fragile hope, a quiet determination that this was not the end, but perhaps the beginning of a truth long denied. The camera continued recording, unblinking, capturing every tremor, every tear, every heartbeat. Taehyung lifted his head slowly, meeting Jungkook's steady gaze. No words were necessary. In that look, in that shared breath, everything was said: fear, love, regret, forgiveness. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Taehyung understood the depth of what Jungkook had done, not for the world, not for the fans, but for him. The quiet weight of the moment lingered, stretching, expanding, until Taehyung realized he could finally breathe again. He rose to his feet, shaky but resolute, and took a step closer. The storm inside him hadn't ended, but he no longer feared it. He was ready to face it, ready to face Jungkook and perhaps ready to face himself. The room felt heavier now, the air thick with unspoken truths. Taehyung stood there, heart pounding, as Jungkook quietly moved to the corner, adjusting a few small details on the recording setup. Every motion Jungkook made seemed deliberate, precise, but also tender, as if he were arranging the world so that no one, including Taehyung, would break under its weight. Taehyung's mind raced, memories colliding with the present. He recalled the endless rehearsals where Jungkook had stayed late, meticulously going over harmonies, sometimes mumbling to himself, sometimes smiling at nothing in particular. He remembered the small acts, folding shared clothes neatly after practice, leaving snacks on Taehyung's desk, sending a quiet text just to check if he was okay. Small, almost invisible gestures, but gestures that now screamed louder than words ever could. He hesitated at the threshold, unsure if he should step forward or retreat into the shadows where he had been hiding his doubts. Jungkook glanced up briefly, catching his eyes, and nodded ever so slightly. It was a gesture that carried centuries of trust, yet also demanded courage. The courage Taehyung had been lacking. "Taehyung," Jungkook said softly, his voice breaking the silence but not the peace, "I'm not asking you to say anything. Just watch, understand." Taehyung's chest tightened, but he moved closer, drawn forward by a force he couldn't name. On the screen, more clips played, moments neither had intended to show anyone else. Behind-the-scenes laughter during award shows, quiet jabs at each other in practice rooms, playful arguments over choreography, and then the rare, silent moments where they had only each other. Every clip was a reminder of the bond they had forged, a bond stronger than fear, stronger than pride, stronger than mistakes. Then came the moment that made Taehyung's world tilt. Jungkook opened a small box he had been hiding from view. Inside was a notebook, worn and frayed at the edges, filled with pages of handwritten lyrics, doodles, and song ideas, songs that had been written for Taehyung, songs that had never been shared. Taehyung's fingers itched to reach out, but he stopped, afraid that the fragile barrier of time and emotion might shatter too soon. Jungkook's hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the notebook. Each page seemed to breathe life into the past, filling the room with the echoes of laughter, whispered encouragement, and confessions never voiced aloud. Taehyung felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes again, hot and unstoppable. "I wanted you to see it," Jungkook said, barely above a whisper. "I didn't want words to get in the way. I wanted you to know, through everything we've shared, through every moment you thought I was distant, I was always here." Taehyung's knees threatened to give out. He sank onto the edge of the studio couch, clutching his hands together, trying to contain the storm inside. He could barely comprehend the magnitude of what Jungkook had done. This wasn't just a gesture. It was an opening of the soul, a declaration of honesty that cut through every shadow Taehyung had built around himself. The clips shifted, showing more of their shared past, now intertwined with present actions. Jungkook had recorded himself recreating moments Taehyung had loved, quietly singing a melody Taehyung hummed absent-mindedly, replaying choreography they had perfected together, sometimes failing, sometimes excelling, but always doing it with Taehyung in mind. It was intimate, raw, and impossibly vulnerable. Why would you do all this?" Taehyung finally managed to whisper, his voice choked. The tears came freely now, streaming down his face. It wasn't sadness alone. There was awe, gratitude, regret, and a sense of relief he hadn't realized he needed. Jungkook simply smiled, a small, knowing smile that carried the weight of everything unspoken between them. "Because someone had to. Because I couldn't wait for you to see it yourself. Because I care. I always have. And I want you to see that without any doubt." Taehyung's hands shook as he reached out, finally daring to touch the notebook, feeling the texture of the pages beneath his fingertips. The physical connection somehow made the emotional one more tangible. Each word, each doodle, each line of melody was proof, proof of intention, proof of love, proof of unwavering commitment. For the first time in weeks, Taehyung allowed himself to truly breathe. The heaviness that had pressed against him, threatening to crush him from within, began to lift. Jungkook's silent, deliberate actions had bypassed words, had bypassed pride, had bypassed fear, and landed directly in the place that mattered most, Taehyung's heart. The room seemed to hum with a quiet energy, a resonance born of honesty and revelation. Taehyung's mind, once cluttered with doubt, began to clear, replaced by a singular focus, understanding, accepting, and responding, not with words, not yet, but with presence, with recognition of the courage Jungkook had displayed, and with his own courage to finally acknowledge what had always been there. As the final clip played on the screen, showing a simple, unguarded smile from Jungkook, Taehyung felt something shift inside him. A fragile hope, delicate but insistent, blossomed in the chest where fear had once resided. He wiped his tears with the back of his hand, inhaling deeply. This was more than a revelation. It was a beginning, a chance to rebuild, to reconnect, to embrace a truth that had been there all along but required courage to face. He looked at Jungkook, eyes meeting eyes, and in that shared silence Taehyung knew. Whatever had been lost in misunderstanding or distance could now be reclaimed. The tears had washed away the uncertainty, leaving clarity, leaving connection, leaving the undeniable proof that Jungkook had acted not for spectacle, not for anyone else, but for him, and that recognition was worth everything. And in that quiet, trembling acknowledgement, Taehyung cried once more, not from pain, not from fear, but from a profound, almost overwhelming realization of love, loyalty, and the lengths someone would go to show it. Taehyung sat back, still holding the notebook, feeling the warmth of Jungkook's presence like a tether to something solid in a world that had felt increasingly unstable. The screen had gone dark now, but the weight of what he had just witnessed lingered in the room like a palpable pulse. He could still see the smile, hear the quiet sincerity in every word, and feel the care embedded in every motion Jungkook had performed. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Words seemed almost unnecessary here. The connection was alive, buzzing between them with a delicate tension that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Taehyung's fingers traced the edges of the notebook absent-mindedly, and he realized that Jungkook had not only opened a window into his own heart, but had provided Taehyung the key to access it. "Why did it take you so long to show me?" Taehyung whispered finally, voice thick with emotion. It was part accusation, part confession, part wonder. Jungkook's gaze softened and he shifted closer, letting the small distance between them shrink. "Because I didn't want to push. I wanted you to see it when you were ready. I wanted it to be yours to accept or not," Jungkook replied. His words were careful but imbued with sincerity, with patience that only deep care could justify. "I couldn't force it, Taehyung. I just had to wait and hope you'd understand one day." Taehyung's heart throbbed painfully, each beat echoing the truth he had been avoiding for weeks. The realization was brutal in its clarity. Jungkook had been patient, steadfast, and thoughtful even when Taehyung had felt abandoned by circumstance or misunderstanding. And now, seeing it laid bare, he couldn't contain the torrent of emotions any longer. He buried his face in his hands for a moment, letting the tears fall freely. The dam had broken and there was no turning back. Jungkook reached out, gently resting a hand on Taehyung's shoulder, grounding him, silently telling him it was okay to let it out. The simple touch carried more meaning than any dramatic confession could. It was reassurance, it was presence, it was love made tangible. When Taehyung looked up, his vision blurred from crying. Jungkook handed him a pen. Confused, Taehyung hesitated. What is this?" he asked, voice still trembling. "Write something," Jungkook said softly, "anything. About how you feel, about what you've seen, about us, whatever comes to mind. I want you to have this too. I want your heart on these pages as much as mine is in that notebook." Taehyung's fingers shook as he accepted the pen. He opened a blank notebook that had been waiting on the table, a simple gesture that now felt monumental. The first line he wrote was shaky, hesitant, almost like stepping into icy water, but each subsequent word found its rhythm, flowing more freely as the flood of emotions began to pour out. Memories, confessions, regrets, gratitude, all tangled together in a messy, beautiful tapestry of feeling. Jungkook watched silently, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. He didn't interrupt, didn't guide, just let Taehyung navigate his emotions at his own pace. The respect for that space, for that process, made Taehyung's heart ache even more. This wasn't a performance, it wasn't for anyone else. This was real, raw, and entirely theirs. Hours seemed to pass unnoticed as the two of them remained there, side by side. Taehyung's words filled the notebook, and with every page turned, he felt a part of the heaviness lift. Jungkook occasionally reached over to tap a page, nodding in quiet approval, silently validating every emotion that spilled onto the paper. Then, almost without warning, a quiet energy shifted in the room. Taehyung looked up to see Jungkook standing, holding the notebook he had presented earlier. Jungkook's eyes glimmered, not with tears but with a rare intensity, a clarity of purpose. "I have one more thing for you," Jungkook said, his voice steady now, a contrast to the storm that had just passed. He opened the notebook, revealing a new page freshly written. On it were lyrics, lines that Taehyung had hummed during late-night practices, melodies he had muttered under his breath when no one was listening. Jungkook had not only captured them but woven them into a song, a gift, a declaration, and a promise all at once. Taehyung's breath caught. He recognized each melody immediately. It was theirs, undeniably theirs. And in that moment, the reality of Jungkook's actions, the patience, the thoughtfulness, the love that had gone unsaid for so long, hit him like a wave. Why would you do all this for me?" Taehyung whispered, voice breaking again, tears streaming freely. "Because you matter," Jungkook said simply but with absolute conviction. "Because you always have, and because I couldn't watch you doubt it anymore. I had to show you in every way I could." The words struck Taehyung with the force of truth. He realized that the tears he shed were no longer just for sorrow or regret. They were for relief, recognition, and an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for Jungkook's courage, for his unwavering presence, for the depth of care that had been quietly building for years. Taehyung closed his eyes, letting the emotion wash over him. The notebook, the song, the small gestures, the deliberate patience, all of it combined into a revelation too profound to put into words. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, he felt a clarity, a connection, and a warmth that had eluded him for too long. He opened his eyes to find Jungkook still standing there, the quiet determination in his gaze both intimidating and comforting. Taehyung felt an undeniable pull, a mixture of vulnerability and trust, that drew him closer, bridging the emotional distance that had lingered between them. And in that quiet, charged moment, Taehyung understood something he had always known but never fully embraced. That love, true love, was not loud or demanding. It was patient. It was deliberate. It was brave enough to wait for understanding. And Jungkook had shown it all in ways that left Taehyung no choice but to confront his own feelings, finally, fully, and without reservation. Tears continued to flow, but now they carried a different weight. They were not just for the past, not just for what had been lost or feared. They were for the realization that someone somehow had always been there, working silently, acting thoughtfully, and loving relentlessly. Taehyung wiped his cheeks, a small, shaky smile breaking through. Jungkook's hand reached out again, and this time Taehyung took it, their fingers intertwining naturally. The gesture was simple, but in it lay an ocean of unspoken words, promises, and the unbreakable bond that neither time nor circumstance could sever. The hours faded around them. Outside, the world continued in its chaos, but inside the studio, time had slowed. Every glance, every gesture, every tear shed in quiet acknowledgement of each other's, hearts had carved a space where only truth resided. Taehyung leaned back slightly, notebook in lap, heart racing yet steady in a way it hadn't been for months. Jungkook's presence was no longer just beside him, it was with him, woven into every fiber of this moment, into every beat of his heart. And as he looked at Jungkook, really looked, he knew with certainty. What Jungkook had done was more than a gesture, more than a gift. It was a revelation. It was a confession without words. It was love, raw and unfiltered, and it had shattered every wall Taehyung had built around himself. For the first time, Taehyung allowed himself to fully surrender to the moment, to the connection, to the trust, to the undeniable proof of Jungkook's care. And as he did, he realized that the tears he cried were not a sign of weakness. They were the sign of a heart finally awake to the truth it had always known. The room was quiet except for the faint scratch of pen on paper as Taehyung continued to write, pouring his heart onto the pages that had now become both confession and sanctuary. Each word he wrote felt heavier and more real, as if the ink itself carried the weight of every fear, every longing, every unspoken moment he had ever felt with Jungkook. The vulnerability was terrifying, yet liberating. Jungkook sat nearby, leaning casually against the wall, but his presence was commanding. It was impossible for Taehyung to ignore it. The way Jungkook's eyes followed his every movement, the slight tilt of his head, the subtle encouragement in his expressions, every detail reminded Taehyung of the depth of their connection. And with every page Taehyung filled, he realized that this was more than just a moment of reckoning. It was the beginning of understanding, the start of a truth that neither of them could deny. After a long silence, Taehyung finally closed the notebook, running his fingers over the fresh ink. He felt lighter, almost buoyant, as though the words had lifted a burden he hadn't fully realized he was carrying. But then, a small, hesitant knock at the studio door reminded him that the world outside this bubble still existed. "Come in," Taehyung called, his voice steadier than he felt. The door creaked open and a producer poked their head in, looking apologetic. "Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but Jungkook's schedule, we need him for the rehearsal soon." Taehyung nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Of course," he said, glancing at Jungkook, who gave a subtle nod in return. There was no rush, no tension, only an unspoken understanding that whatever had just happened between them was not something that could be confined to a schedule. As the producer left, Jungkook rose, stretching casually, but his eyes never left Taehyung. "You okay?" he asked softly. Taehyung nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, I think I'm finally okay, or at least I'm starting to be." Jungkook's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. "Good, because I'm not going anywhere." Those words hit Taehyung harder than he expected. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic proclamation, just a quiet, steady promise that held more weight than any loud declaration ever could. And in that moment, Taehyung realized that all the tears, all the doubts, all the fear, they were nothing compared to the clarity and certainty he felt now. He stood, moving closer to Jungkook, the distance between them shrinking until it was negligible. I don't know how to thank you," Taehyung admitted, voice barely above a whisper, "for everything, for being patient, for showing me this, for showing me you." Jungkook reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from Taehyung's forehead. "You don't have to thank me," he said gently. "You just have to let yourself feel it, let yourself trust it. That's enough." Taehyung's chest tightened and he closed his eyes for a moment, letting the words sink in. Trust had always been difficult for him. Vulnerability had always felt like a risk he couldn't take. But with Jungkook, it wasn't risk. It was a certainty, a reassurance that no matter what, he was seen, he was heard, he was understood. When he opened his eyes, he saw Jungkook's expression softening, a rare vulnerability flickering in his gaze. I've wanted this to happen for so long," Jungkook admitted quietly. "Not just the song, not just the words, but us. I've wanted to show you Taehyung. And now, seeing you here, finally understanding, it's everything I hoped it would be." The honesty in Jungkook's voice was almost too much to bear. Taehyung felt his knees weaken slightly, the floodgates of emotion threatening to reopen. He leaned in closer, their foreheads nearly touching, feeling the heat and life of Jungkook's presence like a magnet pulling him home. "You really mean that?" Taehyung whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of hope and fear. Jungkook nodded, eyes glimmering with a depth of feeling that left Taehyung breathless. "I do, more than anything, and I'll keep showing it every day if you let me." Taehyung's hand reached up hesitantly at first to rest against Jungkook's chest. He could feel the steady beat of Jungkook's heart beneath his palm, a rhythm that seemed to sync with his own. The sensation was grounding, yet electrifying, a paradox that made his chest ache in the best possible way. "Then I want that," Taehyung admitted, the words spilling out with a raw sincerity that made Jungkook's eyes soften even more. "I want that too. I don't want to hide anymore. Not from you, not from myself." Jungkook's hand covered Taehyung's, their fingers intertwining naturally, almost as if they had always been meant to fit together this way. "Then it's ours," Jungkook said simply, yet the gravity of the words carried all the weight of unspoken promises and long-awaited truth. "Ours, Taehyung. Everything we've felt, everything we've wanted, it's ours now." A quiet laugh escaped Taehyung, shaky but genuine, as he felt the tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying dissolve into relief and joy. It wasn't a perfect moment, nothing ever was, but it was real, and that reality was more powerful than any fantasy or imagined scenario could ever be. For a long while they simply stood there, holding onto each other, letting the silence speak volumes. No one interrupted, no one pressured. The world outside the studio ceased to exist, replaced by the gravity of their shared presence. Eventually, Taehyung broke the silence. I think I finally understand what you've been trying to show me all this time," he admitted, a small, confident smile replacing the tears that had threatened to return. "It's not just about the song or the notebook or even the gestures, it's about you. It's always been about you." Jungkook's expression softened further and he leaned in, resting his forehead against Taehyung's once more. "And it's always been about you for me too," he murmured, a quiet conviction threading every word. "Always." The weight of those words, simple yet profound, settled over Taehyung like a warm embrace. He closed his eyes, breathing in the moment, feeling the depth of emotion that had built up over months, perhaps years. He had cried before, yes, but these tears were different. They weren't just for the sadness, or for the misunderstandings, or for the moments lost. They were for clarity, for connection, for the undeniable truth that love had finally been recognized, reciprocated, and celebrated in the quietest, most profound way imaginable. As the light in the studio shifted with the passing hours, Taehyung and Jungkook remained there together, letting the quiet intimacy of shared understanding anchor them. And in that stillness, Taehyung realized that this moment, this feeling, this connection, was worth every tear, every second of doubt, and every risk he had ever taken with his heart. For the first time, he allowed himself to truly believe in what Jungkook had shown him. He allowed himself to trust in the patient, steadfast, and unwavering love that had been quietly waiting all along. And as he did, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The tears finally slowed, leaving only a gentle warmth, a quiet smile, and a heart full of newfound courage. And in that moment, the army watching, even from afar, would be stunned, not just by the actions that had unfolded, but by the profound depth of emotion, care, and authenticity that defined the bond between Taehyung and Jungkook. The hours passed like a gentle current, slow and deliberate, as Taehyung and Jungkook sat together, occasionally exchanging small gestures, fleeting smiles, or shared laughter that felt more meaningful than any grand display could ever be. It was a quiet intimacy that only they understood, an unspoken language that had been cultivated through time, effort, and countless shared experiences. Each glance, each touch, each pause held weight, carrying the history of their connection and the promise of what was still to come. Taehyung's mind wandered, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. He remembered the countless nights filled with doubt and uncertainty, the private battles waged in silence, the times when he had been too afraid to admit even to himself what he truly felt. And yet in all of that, Jungkook had been patient, steadfast, present, always, It was this constancy, this unwavering support that had finally broken down the walls Taehyung had so carefully constructed around his heart. "I never realized," Taehyung murmured, his voice soft, almost like a confession to the room itself, "how much I needed someone like you until now." Jungkook's hand found his again, fingers intertwining naturally as if they were extensions of each other. "And I never realized how much I wanted to show you that I was here, until I saw you start to let go," Jungkook said, his words deliberate and sincere, carrying an intensity that made Taehyung's chest ache in the best way. There was no pretense here, no performance, no need for theatrics. Just honesty, raw, unfiltered, and entirely their own. And in that honesty, Taehyung felt a surge of emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. His eyes glistened, not with sadness this time, but with relief, gratitude, and a happiness so profound that it was almost painful to contain. "Jungkook," Taehyung began, faltering as the weight of his feelings pressed down on him. I've been scared, you know. Scared of what this could mean, scared of letting myself feel it, scared of everything." Jungkook's thumb brushed lightly against the back of Taehyung's hand. "I know," he said simply, "and it's okay. Being scared doesn't make you weak. It just means you care. And the fact that you're willing to face it now, that's brave." Bravery. Taehyung thought about that word and the irony it carried. For so long, he had believed that bravery meant hiding, protecting, or holding back. But here, in the quiet warmth of Jungkook's presence, he realized that true bravery meant opening up, exposing yourself to possibility, to love, to vulnerability. And that realization brought with it a wave of tears that he could no longer hold back. He didn't try to hide them. He didn't apologize. He simply let them fall, feeling the tension and fear of months dissolve into each shimmering droplet. Jungkook didn't flinch. He didn't shy away. Instead, he gently drew Taehyung closer, resting his chin lightly atop Taehyung's shoulder. "It's okay to cry," he whispered. "You've earned this moment." Taehyung pressed a hand against Jungkook's chest, feeling the steady, reassuring beat of his heart beneath his palm. It was grounding, a tangible reminder that he was not alone, that he was seen, that he was loved. The tears continued to fall, but this time they were tears of acceptance, of release, of the overwhelming joy that comes from finally being understood. For a long while they remained like that, two souls intertwined in silence, speaking volumes without uttering a single word. The world outside continued its relentless pace, but inside this cocoon of shared emotion, time seemed to stand still. Every heartbeat, every gentle inhale, every subtle shift in posture conveyed a depth of connection that words could never fully capture. Eventually, Taehyung lifted his head slightly, his eyes meeting Jungkook. "I've spent so long thinking about what I couldn't have, what I couldn't say, what I couldn't feel, and now I don't want to think about any of that anymore. I just want this, us, right now." Jungkook smiled softly, his gaze unwavering, filled with a warmth and sincerity that made Taehyung's heart swell. "Then let's have it," Jungkook replied simply. "Right now, today, every day after, let's stop waiting, stop doubting, stop hiding." A nervous laugh escaped Taehyung, mingled with the residue of tears. "It sounds almost too simple, doesn't it, after everything?" "Sometimes the simplest things are the hardest to accept," Jungkook said, his voice gentle but firm. "But they're also the most real. And this is real." The two of them sat in quiet understanding for a few more moments, letting the gravity of that reality sink in. It was a delicate, fragile beauty, the kind that demands reverence, attention, and care. And in the soft glow of the studio lights, surrounded by the remnants of their creative work and the echoes of their shared history, Taehyung felt a profound sense of peace. Finally, he spoke again, his voice stronger this time, laced with determination and clarity. "I've been holding myself back for too long," he admitted. "Not just from you, but from myself. I don't want to do that anymore. I want to feel everything, embrace everything, and be honest about everything." Jungkook's grip on his hand tightened just slightly, a small but significant reassurance. "Then do it," he said. eyes locked on Taehyung's, conveying more than words ever could. "Do it, Taehyung, and I'll be right here, always." The sincerity, the patience, the unwavering support, it was more than Taehyung had ever dared to hope for. And as he allowed himself to truly feel it, to truly accept it, a new sense of courage blossomed within him. It wasn't loud or boisterous. It was quiet, steady, and enduring. A courage rooted in love, trust, and the profound knowledge that he was finally seen for who he truly was. Tears still glistened on his cheeks, but they were no longer heavy with fear or doubt. They were tears of clarity, of release, of newfound understanding. Each one felt like a tiny victory, a small but significant step toward the emotional freedom he had longed for. And Jungkook, ever patient, ever present, remained by his side, offering nothing but unwavering support and a promise that words could scarcely capture. In that moment, everything else, fame, expectation, uncertainty, faded into irrelevance. What mattered was simple, pure, and undeniable: the bond they shared, the love they had cultivated, and the courage to finally embrace it fully. Taehyung leaned his forehead against Jungkook's once more, inhaling the familiar, comforting scent that had always grounded him. "Thank you," he whispered, voice soft but filled with conviction, "for being you, for letting me be me, for everything." Jungkook's hand cupped Taehyung's cheek gently, eyes glimmering with a mix of tenderness and emotion. "No, thank you," he said quietly, "for trusting me, for letting this happen, for letting us happen." It was a moment suspended in time, rich with emotion, authenticity, and the unspoken understanding that this was only the beginning. A beginning that carried the weight of truth, the freedom of vulnerability, and the promise of a bond that would endure. For Taehyung, the tears that fell now were different than any he had cried before. They weren't born of sadness, frustration, or fear. They were tears of recognition, of love, of the profound and stunning realization that Jungkook's presence, his actions, his patience, and his unwavering devotion had unlocked something within him that had always been waiting to be set free. And as the quiet of the studio embraced them both, it was clear to Taehyung that whatever the future held, he would face it with courage, clarity, and a heart open enough to accept the extraordinary depth of connection he shared with Jungkook. The army watching, even from a distance, could sense it. They were stunned, not just by what Jungkook had done, but by the transformative power of genuine emotion, trust, and the patience that allowed love to grow in its own time, revealing itself in the most breathtakingly authentic way possible.